Ancient is a word that doesn't begin to properly describe the age of the Necrons in the Warhammer 40,000 lore. The event that causes them to slumber in their tomb worlds occurs 60 million years in the past in the 40k timeline, meaning Earth, Terra for you lore pedants out there, was in the Paleocene epoch, when the dinosaurs were first gone from the world and the rapid evolution of mammals had begun. That's not just ancient, that's demonstrably older. This is the galaxy in which the Necrons make what could be their most important decision of their time. At the time of the War in Heaven, the race called the Necrontyr were losing a galaxy-wide conflict with the Old Ones badly. Despite superior numbers and very advanced technology, the Necrontyr were simply no match for the might of the Old Ones, and were soon beaten back to the edges of the galaxy and reduced to a minimal fraction of their glory. It is in this time of near certain defeat that the Deceiver, a star god with immense power, came to the Necrontyr to make a deal. These vampiric gods sucked the energy from the universe, and the bargain they struck with the Necrontyr was just another ploy to gain power. We are told that the ruling triarch of the Necrontyr, including the Silent King himself, made a pact with the star gods wherein the Necrontyr would go through biotransference. They would have their souls removed and placed into living metal bodies. Unknown to the triarchs until it was too late, the process rendered the normal Necrontyr into little more than automatons, slaved to their lords. The Necrons were born from lies and deceit of biotransference. While they may ultimately have defeated the Old Ones, and then enslaved the deceitful Satan, could it be argued that the deal the Necrons made could be considered the galaxy's greatest case of buyer's remorse? As usual, 40k Lore Podcast, be aware, potential spoilers are ahead. Today, let's start with the con argument of this buyer's remorse. So, Adam, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think they could have. I think the Necrons could have done without taking the deal, or at least gotten a better deal. If you look at the book, I forgot the name. It's the Archon book. We have to edit this part.
Is it called like the Loomed and the Divine?
Something and the Divine, the Infinite. So if you look at the book, the Infinite and the Divine, which tells the tale of two Necron overlords and their millennial contest with each other, which is actually a very good book. One of them talks about basically getting their physical body back, or a new physical body. And they go through and one was actually fine not having a physical body or a squishy body anymore. And they even talk about how they're able to revive themselves when they get hurt because he has extra spares. Other ones talks about why they want the body back. And for those that don't know, back when the Necrons were fleshed, they were, I believe the sun was either a different color or they were closer to the sun, but it gave off a higher radiation. So they got basically cancer more often. So the race wasn't long lived to begin with. And I know part of the reason why they took the offer was so that they could live longer. Unfortunately, a lot of them lost themselves because of the process, which is why you have kind of the mindless robots that you see in the current fluff. And I believe that was I don't believe that was part of what they expected when they took the deal, which is why I think it's a raw deal. It was a raw deal. And I think they could have gone forward without it and still got the outcome that they wanted. But unfortunately there probably would have been more casualties. And I think that's what maybe part of the reason why they took the deal. I think they could have still captured the Star Gods and bent them to their will. I think it just would have been a lot more work.
All right, so taking the pro angle here is going to be Danny.
So I think that had the Necrontyr not taken the deal, they would have lost the War in Heaven. That one of their advantages against the Eldar was, again, their new metallic bodies, their kind of access to the Gauss weaponry and like all these things. And the fact that they could survive their home world and develop weapons that they could not use as mortals because they're so radioactive, right? It allowed them kind of a host of new technology and weapon trees that, again, a metallic body does not have to worry about the side effects of as a, organic body. And also I think there's just, what do they say? The proof is in the pudding that the War in Heaven happened how many billions of years ago, right? And out of all the people involved who are around, the Necrons, and maybe you could count the orcs, or excuse me, the the Crorks, or whatever you want to call them. So really the Necrons, they won. And yeah, they had to go into slumber because they kind of annihilated life in the galaxy. So what else are they going to do for a while? And they even trapped the very people they made the deal with, right? Like they literally, it's the idea of the Faustian deal, but they literally took out Mephistopheles and made him a servant and shattered them into a million pieces to be weapons for them, right? So I think just at the end of the day, flash forward however many years, the Necron are still around. Yeah, a lot of them are mindless robots, but that probably wasn't part of their deal. But for the Empire, for the Necron Empire itself, it is very much a good deal because they're still around, right? And they're actually just starting, in again the setting of the floor, they're starting to just come back into their full power. They're just starting to wake up, right? So there's no other civilization in the lore that is as old as they are. Right. And again, and not just, the Eldar are pretty old, but they're broken, right? Like they're flaring out. I mean, the Necrons even predate essentially the Chaos Gods in many ways, right? Like they're, the war in heaven kind of gives birth to these things. I mean, they were there before. So like the fact that they're still running, they're still around, and they're still a viable threat. They're just waking up slowly. But they're still a viable force in the galaxy, I think shows that they got a pretty good deal because no one else is at that time period.
Yeah, I'd have to say that I kind of agree with that. I think that they really were never, I don't think they were ever really going to beat the old ones at all. In fact, the fluff oftentimes says that. Like I think it's even as far back as the first Necron Codex, it talks about how without the biotransference, they were never going to beat the old ones. That the old ones had like beaten them back into a tiny little corner of the galaxy, and they were stuck there. And like it was only that deal with the C'tan that worked for them. I don't think that means that there's not buyer's remorse. I think that it's entirely possible for them to both accept what happened and still be like, that probably wasn't the best deal ever. Like, isn't that why Zarek left? Like he breaks his command protocols and leaves. One of the theories is he leaves to try to find a solution to the biotransference problem to be able to bring people back, like to reverse it. And then there's that other theory that, well, when he encountered the Tyranids, did he actually come back because he's afraid the Tyranids will destroy the galaxy? Or does he come back because he thinks the Tyranids hold the key to reversing the issue? Like, I don't know. So there's a little bit of, I think, both sides here, where it's entirely possible to be like, there was no choice, but also our no choice sucked. Right? Tom?
I think another piece of that too is that while we can absolutely point to the longevity of a civilization or of a race, and say that just by sheer length of time, right? That's a recurring theme we seem to hit, that length is kind of a very real indicator of the success of some kind of empire or race. One of the things, though, that I think is interesting is, they've been around for millions of years, and they're older, almost completely older than the Eldar, older than almost any other race, conceivable, beating literal gods. But how much of the Necron race are actually able to be categorized as such? I mean, the mass loss of sentience, just the complete reduction to automata, that the Necrons suffered, with only kind of those stronger willed or leadership caste members maintaining their individuality. At that point, it's almost like the Necrontyr could be truly argued to have died, and what replaced them were, their same numbers, but as robots with simply just a few handlers, right? With a few key figures and pharaons and, tomb kings that actually say, that are actually people could be quantified as being sentient and therefore a race. Now, if you argue the definition of sentience is not necessary for that, then then that's not an issue. I think they got the better end of the deal. But if you argue that sentience is kind of important to consider what a race is and what a civilization is, not just a bunch of functioning robots on the moon, but an actual living, breathing society with like elements of culture and of art to some degree. Even warlike societies in histories past had some kind of other breakthroughs or breakouts, at the very least, into other aspects of what we consider human culture. There's never been never been some society that's just been so mono something that they abandoned all else, maybe abandoned a few things, but like they always still had some kind of other elements that pervaded their lives, even if they were particularly focused. But with the Necrons, you can't even say any of that. Their aesthetics and their designs are remnants from what they used to be and what their gifts were given. It's almost all functional. It's no longer about aesthetic, rather, it's not about culture. It's not there's no poetry, so to speak. And I think that way you could maybe say, maybe they're not even a civilization anymore, truly.
I think that like one thing we also have to consider here is, were the Necrontyr ever actually, as a people, free? And like, did they have a better life? Because the Necrontyr's roots are on these crazy radioactive planets with tiny little lifespans, right? And that kind of environment, to me, does not seem like it would breed a very, like, I don't know, free and open and egalitarian society, right? Like, I feel like the lords and the overlords and the pharaons exist for a reason within the Necrons, and I think it's because it mimics the Necrontyr society. So I don't know how much they actually lost by becoming automatons. Did the actual Necrontyr people lose a lot? Or were the most of them turned into Necron warriors because most of them were already peasants? Right? So like I don't know the answer to that. And I'm not sure anybody knows the answer to that. I don't know if that's actually been covered. Like, I've read all the Necron codexes and a lot of their fluff and stuff, but like, I don't know if it's ever been covered, like what Necrontyr society itself was like. But I do know that the Necrons themselves are supposed to mimic or mirror the Necrontyr, right? So it would make sense that a vast number of their society was automaton already, like, or worker bees, right? Like, they were already people who did not have a lot of freedom. And so how much do they actually lose in biotransference? Or is this literally a problem of like Zarek being like, what? I'm stuck in this metal body now? This isn't what I agreed to. I wanted the metal body to be like my normal body, but metal and immortal. And like, is he just mad because he got duped? Is he mad because he personally is affected in a way he doesn't like? Does he actually care about his people? Is he even a he? I don't even know what the genders were for the Necrontyr society. Like, we know nothing about the Necrontyr society, right? Like, we know so little about it. So for me, it's kind of like, where would the remorse kick in? And for whom would it actually kick in? Danny?
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of look at that of like, we don't know what their society actually even, was. And then there's also this question of that brought up about, well, if you're talking about like, okay, well, only the pharaons and the lords and overlords really have like personalities and really have like what we would constitute like true sentience or human definitions of sentience, right? And free will. And really what it comes down to is agency, right? Like the ability to make choices. You can argue how many people in any society actually have that, right? Like how much of us are just cogs in a machine versus the people who actually have real agency, the ability to make decisions that are then carried forward with no limitations, right? Again, I can go and shop where I want. I can go do a lot of things myself, but like, can I really choose to do, it's like, cool, I could go to Ralph's or I could go to Vaughn's. Like, am I really choosing, the choices I've been given are still within a constrained system, right? And how many people actually have that true freedom in a society. And, I'm sure you could argue, there's plenty of ways to argue that, well, very few actually do. So, how much, when we say, or, you think of like bees or ants in a colony, right? Like, there's a very small leader caste of some variety and the rest are all kind of workers. And does that make them less sentient, or simply that they, simply follow a different understanding of existence, right? Where, again, our concept of sentience is very human. And we've never, this is one of the great philosophical debates of, we don't really have any written records of interacting with any other sentient creature that isn't us, right? So there's no way to really compare our sentience to anything else, right? Like we don't have written records from hanging out with Neanderthals or Devosians or things like that, right? So we really can't say what it is. So maybe the robots and the warriors and kind of the chaff maybe to humans appear as just automata, but maybe there is some kind of understanding that we just don't, that we don't process. And I always think of how often really, even in the novels that are about non-Imperium things, so much of it is told from an Imperium perspective, right? Like, and, because they're the humans in the story, you kind of need to ground it. It's really hard, like I always think of like, how would you write a story from like a Tyranid perspective where it's just such an alien concept of, of what reality is. So I think it's, it's hard to say who even lost or gained anything other than the fact what we can tangibly tell, which is that there's civilization or some mirror of it still exists. There are what we would call sentient creatures from that time period still alive, still with agency, still making choices. And that, they achieved their goal, which is they defeated the old ones, right? They got what they want and then, destroyed the gods who did this to them. So, it becomes, and there, I still think there is still even, speaking of Zarek, of like a kind of sad hope of like, assuming they do conquer the galaxy, which because they have like pretty much no souls the way we think of it, they have no imprint in the warp, would starve the chaos gods and get rid of them. Would they have time to, with no war, could they dedicate the rest of their resources and basically eternity to finding a way to reverse or at least better adapt the biotransference. So again, they actually, of all the different factions within the lore, they actually have an end game that could be achievable, right? Like Tyranids eat the galaxy. What do? They move to a new galaxy. The orcs conquer everything. What are they going to do? They're just going to fight each other forever, right? And probably wax and wane because of that. The Imperium, I think we've argued, can it ever come back, right? The Eldar aren't coming back. I mean, what happens if Chaos wins? Like, it's just, basically the warp in real space all the time. And, then it's just the great game over and over again. But at least the Necrons have a sense of like, we can achieve something beyond just war. Right, we can achieve something more. So that to me still seems like that's a good deal for how long they've been alive in the grim darkest of grim dark universes that they exist within.
Adam?
I think I still think that they could have achieved a lot of that even without the biotransference. I mean, they had the ability or the ability to create the technology that they did. I think they could have created automaton without having to become the automaton. And I think eventually they probably would have enslaved the the star gods still. But I think it would have happened later and just at a greater cost, which may have been part of the reason why they did it. I think, like Danny said, with most people being cogs in the society, they would just do whatever the higher ups would tell them to do, really, without much choice in that regard. So it's really the question of are the people in charge? And according to the books, some of the books, yeah, they were getting some type of remorse, even though they won. It was like Danny said, but was it worth it? It's like the meme everyone shows, at what cost? Like, you got everything, but at what cost? Or what did it cost you? And I think they could have achieved the same, like I said, without having to sacrifice so much. Yeah, they probably wouldn't be around this long to enjoy it, but I don't know if you can call it almost successful only because, yes, they killed their gods. They killed the star gods. They won the war. And then they're gone for the next, I think it's like 60 billion or however many billions of years, mainly because they were waiting for it. In the original fluff, they were waiting for more sentient life to spring out in the galaxy. I don't know if I believe they changed that fluff with them just awakening and the Silent King coming back. But in the original fluff, they went to their sleep because there was not enough sentient life forms in the galaxy to fight. That changed in recent years, I believe, with 5th edition, but I can't recall. John, you would probably know more than I would. But I personally think they could have done it even without having to go through the biotransference. A lot of those people wouldn't be around though, and they would have to trust in the future generation. So if you ask any boomer, they wouldn't put any trust in the future generation. So maybe there's that. That issue.
The boomer before it was cool.
I don't trust these young guys. I'll just do it myself. I'll just live forever and do it myself. But and there's also the fact that, and again, hindsight's always 20/20, just with everything. But just the fact that the destroyer cult's around, and you have these quote unquote people that are degrading in terms of their mindset, almost like dementia or Alzheimer's, where they don't remember anybody around them. All they remember is they just need to kill everything. And that actually affects both all the other sentient races and the Necrons, because most of the Necron overlords are not really fans of the destroyer cult. They'll use them when they have to, but they treat them almost like a plague of locusts, basically, when they arrive on a planet. And if you read the book again, The Infinite and the Divine, there's a great description on how the destroyer cult operates, how they destroy all living things from the largest sentient or largest being down to the microbes. You know, and they just go across the planet doing that until it's completely laid waste, almost like the Tyranids, which is what's funny about that.
Yeah, but the Tyranids don't necessarily destroy; they
no, but the result is the same. You have a dead planet with no living things on it, because they're either destroyed by the destroyer cult or they're eaten by the Tyranids.
I assume Danny has something to say about that.
Yeah, but I mean, at least when the Tyranids eat a planet, that biomass is not gone. It's just added to the Tyranid fleet. It just gets big.
I'm not disputing that part. The result's still the same. There's no more planet.
I don't know if it's the same though, because in the one instance with the destroyer cults, it's literally destroying the life.
Right.
And with the Tyranids, you're transferring the life. It's biotransference.
But the result on the planet,
you're transferring the life from one thing to another thing, and so that life moves on. It lives on in the growing fleet. Now,
right.
You do leave behind a dead planet.
That's the part I'm talking about.
But the life is not itself gone. Like with the destroyer cult, it's just becomes something else. If the destroyer cult removed all life and then was able to bring some Necron warriors back using it, then I believe the analogy would work.
No, my analogy is more that they both leave a dead planet, regardless of where the material goes.
Sure.
The end result on the planet is the same. But like I said, so that's another more or less what some of the overlords might, have some remorse about, of like, oh great, more and more of our population is becoming either mindless robots, which may or may not matter, but more importantly, they might be becoming part of the destroyer cult, which actually may affect their future plans.
Or worse, they're becoming flayed ones. Those guys.
Well, that's part of the destroyer cult. So it's destroyers, the flayed ones, and the new unit they introduced. I forget what it's called.
I thought flayed ones weren't specifically part of the destroyer cult.
No, they're part of the destroyer cult.
Do they have the keyword in the game?
I thought that
this is not a game podcast. This is a lore podcast.
I thought the difference between the flayed ones and the destroyer cult was that the flayed ones are subject actually to a virus, which makes them the way that they are, versus the destroyer cult, which is a programming that they've had always.
No, I think that was it depends, because I think that was the fluff in the past. Now I think they're combining all the different types of like that type of kill kill all sentient life, kill the humans, so that they attack anything living. But in either case, you still have the same degradation of the sentient of whatever, whether it's a flayer or a destroyer. So you're losing that part of it, and it may actually interfere with whatever plans that they have in regards to finding a source to reversing the biotransference.
Okay, well, we've had a pretty good discussion here about whether or not this biotransference was the galaxy's greatest case of buyer's remorse. And we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Pod Save the Imperium, where we've taken a little dip into the Xenos pool of things. And we hope you stay subscribed and join us next time when we'll be discussing some more Xenos, the Eldar.